Thank you. So I'm going to ask all of you to stand up for a minute. And I'm going to ask you to be part of an experiment. So I'm going to make my way back and get a wireless mic. Trust me, you're going to thank me for that. While I'm doing that, I'm going to ask to start at this table. And I'm going to ask the gentlemen to count off by 5. And every 5th person, please remain standing. And no, gentlemen by 6, women by 5. So every 6th man, every 5th woman, please remain standing. Everyone else can sit down. Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yes, we have sound. I bet you all think that this is a social experiment. We're actually videoing it for the kids so they can see how well you can count. Kidding. So we've been through the room. So if you look around the room, the statistics for our nation today are one in 5 women in the nation and 1 in 6 men by the time of 18 have been sexually assaulted in a violent way. So if you look, this is a cross-section. We're going to start by looking at some numbers, and the numbers are big, and they're overwhelming. But this is what we're talking about. And if one of these people is related to you, or you know them, and they actually are a survivor of any degree of sexual violence, you would know that even one instance changes a life forever. So why we should matter, and I was really choking up when I listened to them, is why we should matter, is because if these lives were forever changed and the way God designed them to live, it didn't happen, how would it affect your life? Who wouldn't be born? Who wouldn't be married? Who wouldn't have the job they have? Who wouldn't have the mentor, the Sunday school teacher, the grandparent? It matters in a nutshell because it affects our society at every level in every way. Thank you guys, you can sit down. If you could bring up the slide. I give you a PowerPoint, sorry. I am guilty. I believe it's on the thumb drive. So I'll start talking. I'm going to start, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the numbers, but I will start and introduce you to some of the numbers. And the reason I'm going to do that is because there's always somebody in the room that will hear a story like mine, and they'll say, well, yeah, that can't happen all the time. Or, well, what are the numbers? Like, how big a problem is it? And so I want to walk you through, and you'll see as we bring up the PowerPoint, I want to walk you through some of the numbers. And I'm starting with a national level. And if you start, I'm starting with a global level. And the most recent global studies say that there are right now just over 20 million survivors worldwide, or 20 million annual victims worldwide of human trafficking and slavery. We use the term human trafficking because while what the survivor experiences is slavery and horrific violence and torture, from a legal standpoint, thank you, if we can go to slide 2. From a legal standpoint, trafficking is more than what I experienced. Trafficking is what I experienced. It's what the individuals who paid to assault violently, in my case, starting from a young child, and we'll talk about that more later, but paid to have sex with these young children. And I know that these are tough subjects, and there's some sort of vicarious trauma, and I think that there's a time and a place, and there's sometimes when we have to open up our hearts and trust that God is big enough to talk about handling tough subjects. So, as you can see, this talks about the 29 million or roughly 21 million And it shows by country, or by, so Asia is the first. The second biggest consumers of slavery and human trafficking in the world are Western nations. It isn't an over there problem. It's a here problem. Another misconception is that it's all sex trading. When we talk about human trafficking, we're talking about labor trafficking. We're talking about forced labor in certain nations. So there are, of that 20 million, 2.1 million people who are estimated to be in forced labor in countries like North Korea, or China, or Russia, or little dictatorships in Asia and Africa that we can't even keep up with the names because they've changed so quickly. And so what I really want you to see here is that this isn't an over there problem, and it isn't just about sexual exploitation. It's also about labor exploitation. And they both matter in significant ways. We go to the next slide, please. Thank you. 3 of every 1,000 individuals in the world are actually estimated to be trafficked. And so the numbers are huge, and they're kind of mind-boggling. And I don't know about you, but I can't wrap my brain around 1 million, let alone 20 million. And we're talking about 20 million this year, but that gets added to next year, and the year after. And they become victims, die and never are known. And some manage to make it through, like myself, and become survivors. And so we have basically 21 million victims today. But we have, if there's 21 million victims today, we have substantially more survivors fighting to be free, even in the world. And so, I want to look at the percentages instead of that 20 million. So, of the 20 million, 90% are in forced labor or sexual exploitation. Women represent significantly the biggest percentage of people who are trafficked. But men are trafficked in substantial and alarming numbers. Thankfully, children represent the smallest portion. So that's another misconception. We think about child labor, which is very real, but it is not as prevalent because people like you started to care and made a big deal out of it. And so, if there's just the percentages, it starts to get a little bit easier to think about. As you look at those percentages, your mind can come back down. And if you look at the room, you can kind of conceive of, okay, well, what would 55% of the women look like in that room? I can get my mind around that. Or what about 45% of the guys? I can get my mind around that. Because really, one life, if it was just one person, Jesus came for that one person. So there is a lot of debate about the numbers. There are a lot of people that will say to you, you want to go to the next slide, please? There are a lot of people that will say, we don't really know what the numbers are. I agree, we don't. This is one of the most underreported crimes in the world, and it is also, many believe, the fastest growing business in the world. And there's a lot of reasons to that. So now as we go from national or global to national, it's a little bit more realistic. You can break it down and you can look at that. And so these statistics are calculated by an organization called Polaris. Anyone who's active in human trafficking will recognize that name. Polaris is a not-for-profit organization who does a lot of things, one of which is they run and operate the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And another is, from that hotline, they are tasked with keeping track of, on a national level, the statistics or the numbers of incidents. And so all they can report is what's reported to them. There are far more, like when we look at state statistics, and if you added up all the state stats, they would surpass that. And it's because your first thought is not to call a national hotline unless you actually are aware of human trafficking and the existence of that hotline. So most people report on a local level. Of this, I want to share some statistics, some numbers that are really pretty scary. And so in this country today, we lose 800,000 kids. We lose them. Of that 800,000, we know, or we estimate, we think we know, that about 350,000 run away or can be accounted for. And so we basically have a group of kids that run away. We have some kids that are kidnapped by family members or are known kidnapped victims. And then we have about 350,000 kids in this country, according to our FBI, that we can't account for. We don't know what happens to them. They're just gone. Most of them were never seen or heard from, never turned back up, they're never found. There's very few stories of, hey, I was one of those kids that disappeared, and there's reasons for that. And so if we continue looking at some of the things that we think we know, of the 350,000 kids that run away, we know that on average, 1/3 of those kids within 48 hours will be lured into a trafficking situation. Not because they want to be, not because they did something wrong, not because they ran away and they deserved it, or they ran away and they put themselves in harm's way. That's just not true. And it's not even rational thinking. That's like saying, okay, well, I went to kill a bee's nest and I got stung, so it's my fault. Let that sink in for a minute. If 1/3 of 350,000 runaways are going to be lured into human trafficking this year, that's 116,000 children under the age of 18 who from no other source but runaways will be lured into human trafficking situations. Statistically, most people who are lured into human trafficking situations don't make it out. Most of us are dead, maximum 7 years. Most of those who survive that 7 years are so broken, so addicted, and I can think of, to you, because I'm now a mentor and an advocate, I see faces when I talk to you. I hear names. These are people that I know, that I knew just even sometimes this much of their story, but their life mattered. Most who make it out never find wholeness. And there's a lot of reasons to that, but none of them are okay. And so there's an element of choice in that, and there's an element of, as a society, we don't do a very good job in loving others. We don't do a very good job of listening. We don't do a very good job of actually rolling up our sleeves and figuring out how to have relationships. And so, another misconception is that those runaways, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Another misconception is that those runaways who become prostitutes, that it's a lifestyle choice. Well, as someone who, if I had ever been arrested, would have been charged with prostitution, even at 8, while I watched the man who was raping me walk free, I can tell you, you don't wake up and say, I think when I grow up, that's what I want to be. Something profoundly wrong goes wrong in a life, in a child, and it sets us up to either be an easy target, and perpetrators know what to look for. They know who to pick to be easily groomed. Or someone who is in a trusting situation, a parent, a grandparent, a coach, a teacher, a pastor, a Sunday school leader, a mentor, people that look just like everybody in this room, who use looking just like everybody in this room to put themselves in a position to have access to victims, groomed them while they were too young to even think, and put them in that situation. or set them up to believe, well, if this happened when I was a little girl, or this happened when I was a little boy, then it must be me. Because when you're a little girl or a little boy, the world is actually a really scary place when it goes wrong. So when it goes wrong, and it's someone that you love, it's a caretaker, it's someone that's supposed to be, well, they're the good person. Everybody looks up to them. And your perpetrator is saying, well, I'm me. You're a kid. Nobody's going to believe you because they know I'm good. And if you weren't so bad, you wouldn't make me do this. And that's a very common tactic. It's a ridiculously common tactic, whether or not you're a trafficking survivor or you're a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. It's probably one of the most common things that perpetrators do. And so when you're growing up and you're not believed or you're dismissed, it sets you up for a lifetime of hurt. And so now we talked about national. Now let's look at your state. There's some areas that Tennessee does phenomenally well. Tennessee is actually considered one of the best states in the country as far as your laws. Tennessee takes prosecution seriously, which is phenomenal. And Tennessee, despite the fact that this is by and large a pretty poor state, with the resources that you have, does the best that they can to come alongside and support survivors. Is it enough? Nope. But you guys try on the state level. But look, this is reported cases over 100. Count up all the hundreds. And your law enforcement, to quote from the report, this is a 2011 study that was updated in 2013, done by the state of Tennessee. It was done by the state of Tennessee because a previous report had been really criticized. And so when they did this, they went to great lengths to really make sure that there's no double counting. They know that they eliminated a lot of cases. They had a very strict definition of trafficking. They only asked certain law enforcement people. They didn't go and ask anyone else. They asked the law enforcement person in each area who was the trafficking expert. And in some cases, law enforcement are tasked with human trafficking, but they're not trained. All they know is what they learn on the news or what they hear at something like this. They're not actually trained to build trust or to understand trauma bonds or understand a lot of the things that they do, because as a survivor, you go, I'm not talking to you. There's no way. And so, with all of those and more, these are underreported numbers. And we're looking at, in Tennessee, hundreds of cases. Now, I don't know Tennessee. I'm from Connecticut. But if you look at these counties, according to the report, they're not all urban areas. So that's the first misconception. Human trafficking happens in every economic sector. It happens in cities. I grew up in a rural community in upstate New York. My family moved me there for the very simple reason that darkness hides in plain sight. So darkness and people who are set on doing dark, bad things are always going to look for the best opportunity to blend in. And sometimes the best opportunity to blend in is, hey, if I'm a cop, or I'm a pastor, or I'm a teacher, nobody's going to question me, even if somebody said that. And we've seen cases nationally where people who are well known, we've seen, coaches and pastors and cops and every walk of life. And so it's not to pick on police and pastors and coaches. There are the vast majority phenomenal men and women. But darkness hides in plain sight. So strategically, darkness is going to look for the most brilliant, easy place to accomplish its goal and remain undetected. So human trafficking happens in every area. You can go to the next slide, please. Human trafficking also happens every race. I know of no nation in the world that does not have a human trafficking problem. It happens in every economic situation. I know survivors who are my friends who came from families that had homes all over the world. Extremely wealthy, extremely well-educated families. Human trafficking doesn't tend to happen for kids who grow up in loving homes where they can come to mom and dad, no matter how much they mess up, and say, I messed up. And know that they're going to be loved, and know that they're not going to get kicked out, and know that they're going to have consequences for that mess up, but they're going to be able to get through it, and they're still going to have mom and dad's love. For those kids, it's exceedingly rare that they would be targeted as human trafficking survivors. First off, they have a parent that's engaged in their life, and so it's really hard. Traffickers know, now that kid is going to, the first time something's scary, you're going to go to mom and dad. So they're going to get caught. Those are the kids that are going to be like, no, I'm not doing that. They're going to be harder to break. So we'll talk about it more, but one of the most important things that you can do is learn to love well. Notice the children in your life, and everyone in here, whether you're a parent, you're a grandparent, you're a teacher, we all have kids around us all the time. Do we notice them? Do we notice when something doesn't look right? Do we have the guts to say, hey, are you all right? To go over and be purposeful and say, you know, like you had a great game today. I haven't seen you play that bit in a long time. You had a great game today. Or, hey, can I help you out? Looks like you're struggling. I'll have some time, I'll help you out. Now, yeah, you don't want to walk up to a stranger and say, hey, I'll help you out. But I'm not talking about strangers. I'm talking about the kids in your world, being purposeful and knowing them. So I'm going to share a little bit about my story. I'm going to share a little bit about it so that it can help you understand. Because what I really want you to leave here is to know that human trafficking isn't about the numbers. It's about the individual. And if you're here and you're a Christian, it's really important that we begin to learn. You know, I say to the survivors that I report, I love you regardless. They said, what do you mean regardless? I'm like, exactly, regardless. I don't care how many times you go back. I don't care how many times you get high. I don't care. I love you. Well, there's got to be a too bad. Nope, there's no too bad. I know how big God loved me. I know how many times I messed up. I know the bad things I did. He didn't kick me out. So, I am a survivor of human trafficking and ritual abuse. And first I want to introduce you to what ritual abuse is, because most people don't know that. I worked extremely hard with another survivor to create what we think is a pretty realistic and reasonable definition. And so I'm just going to read it to you. At its core, ritual abuse, like all other forms of sexual violence, is about power and control, just on a larger, more incomprehensibly devastating scale. Ritual abuse includes multiple perpetrators, including groups, who have each other on a motivation, often with persuasive ties to organized crime, human trafficking, and the more coherent sexually deviant child pornography, auctions, and prostitution rings. The complexity and extreme levels of abuse these perpetrators leave on survivors, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, leave survivors devastated and often incapable of functioning throughout life. Ritual abuse occurs in every socioeconomic class, in both rural and urban settings, and includes the everyday blue-collar person, as well as high-ranking business, political, church, and public, as well as entertainment figures. Ritual abuse sees no gender, class, creed, or culture. Ritual abuse involves the extreme and violent sexual, physical, spiritual, and psychological abuse by multiple perpetrators intentionally to destroy the child's will. Family involvement and grooming is typical. So ritual abuse is currently being labeled sort of more commonly as trauma-based mind control. For me, I was groomed from the time I was born. I was making hardcore pornography movies by the time I was 18 months old. I don't thankfully remember that, I know that because I do remember being 5 and 6 and having to watch those movies with paying customers. You know, as I think about it now, I left when I was 30. I've been out for almost 24 years. I've done, thankfully, a lot of healing work. I don't know if I would say to you, it was the sexual stuff that was the worst, or no, it was the attachment stuff, and I don't think there's a way to say that. And so, growing up, every member of my family, my mom, my dad, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, were involved. Their role within the organization or the secret society that they were connected to were enforcers and programmers. And so they were skilled, they were rewarded for how violent they could be. They were some of the people that were brought, members of that organization that had messed up, to straighten them up, to torture, and sometimes to kill them. Every member of my family participated, not just in the sexual abuse, but in the willful, purposeful, very calculated destruction of my heart, my spirit. I don't honestly identify as a prostitute, I really don't. I identify as a slave. I wasn't allowed to pick what I wanted. I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. I wasn't allowed to choose what I liked. I wasn't allowed to say I didn't like something. I wasn't allowed to decide what I was going to believe. I wasn't allowed to decide I was going to stop believing something. All of that was dictated to me. And if I got out of line, I was brutally, violently tortured. With kids like me, they start, step 1, by putting you in cages when you're babies and toddlers. And that's where you live until they want to hurt you. And so that's what I came out of. And I'm going to kind of keep it short because there's a lot of vicarious trauma, and I recognize that there's vicarious trauma. I came out of that at age 30, having made, I have no idea how many pornography movies, having been trained to do what they wanted me to do, knowing that going against that would mean that I would be going against something that would desire to kill me for the rest of my life. And they still do. But God is bigger. And He, not them, holds my days. So when I left, if you want to go to the next slide, please. When I left, I didn't know what I was leaving. I didn't choose or say, hey, I want to go start healing. I left because I wanted to be able to go into my room and know that it hadn't been checked and tossed and everything hadn't been gone through while I was at work. And I was so programmed that I could go to work. I could have, as a child, been approached by law enforcement or by a counselor or by a social worker and asked if the bad things were happening to me, and they would have walked away believing I was fine. Because I knew how to answer, and in my mind, my life was normal, and not just normal, but I was one of the lucky kids. I was blessed. So I didn't leave wanting to, I definitely didn't leave wanting to heal. I stumbled into healing. I didn't know what healing was. I left because I wanted to make a choice. And I knew making choices was not allowed. I tried that a few times. So when I left, I'm really thankful that about 6 months after I had to make what for me was a defining moment. And I think that it's important. All survivors have defining moments. You can't fix me. I can't fix the survivors that I love now. We have to want to be fixed. We have to be ready to be fixed. And so when we stumble out of captivity, we don't know what healing is. We don't know your world. We don't know how to relate to you. We don't know how to put words to what had happened. All we know is we were the bad ones. Those things happened because we did something that somehow made people do bad things. And so we don't know how to get help. We don't know where to go for help. We know people can be bad. And generally, for most of us, our experience is that people are going to be, there's something about us. They're just going to keep being bad. My defining moment was getting the proof that I've been looking for a while, that a niece who I had raised since the time she was little was being hurt just like I was. And so I had to make a choice. I could go back to be with her, but going back would only be allowed if I became them. Couldn't do it. I could do nothing, but I knew it would happen to her, and I couldn't do that. And so I did what I knew at that time. All I knew would be probably a death sentence. And I called the police, and I reported. That reporting, we say now, and understand it, like she saved me and I saved her, because the mind games that go with trying to get out, trying to break through trauma bonds, trying to figure out how to live in your world, try to understand what truth is and what right is and what wrong is, and untwist things is something that if you haven't lived, you just can't fathom. But I describe it like this: if you turn your world upside down, can you imagine that? So good becomes bad, bad becomes good. Everything that you think is good, you're not allowed to believe in anymore. It's now bad. Now you take your upside down world and you shake it violently. So now you've not only got everything flipped, but you don't know what anything is. You don't know how to find things. You don't know how to put them back in order. You don't know how to cope. That's what stepping into healing is like for a survivor. You don't know anything. You can go to the next slide, please. That saying that we like to say, let it go, leave it in the past, time heals all wounds. It's actually not true. None of them are. We're not designed to do things in the past. We're not designed by a creator who fearlessly and wonderfully created each one of us. And he didn't create us with the capacity to grow by turning around and running. He created us with the capacity to grow by moving through the bad things in our life with him by our side. And so, for a trauma survivor, trying to leave it in the past, like, yeah, I want that one. Like, trust me, I picked that one because I heard it all the time. It didn't work though. It's like, you have the flashbacks and all the images, and then there's this whole rules thing. Like, I know the rules there, they don't work here. I'm supposed to leave it in the past, but in the future, I don't, like in the present, I don't know. Healing requires getting messy. Getting messy for us as survivors, getting messy for the people who dare to walk next to us. I don't have words to thank or express how thankful I am for the people who walk with me on a regular basis, who walk into some of the darkest places of mankind to help me work through just one instance of abuse that's holding me stuck. And yet they do, because they love me regardless. And yet, not only do they do that, but I watch them stand tall. I watch their reference for good and bad and easy and hard get bigger. I watch their God come out of the box that they put him in, usually kicking, because he wanted to be free like me. And all of a sudden, become who he's always wanted to be. A God of all possibilities. A God that loves regardless. A God that really can do whatever needs to be done. A God that is bigger than my battles. But that doesn't just happen. Next slide, please. It doesn't just happen. It takes hard work. Healing is the hardest thing I've ever done, and it will be the hardest thing I will ever do. I will spend the rest of my life reclaiming my life. discovering the me that God created me to be that was taken by someone else, or that was twisted into something that's not recognizable. So healing is a lifelong journey, but it's also a lifelong investment in growing. We can, I think I covered this, you can skip that one, thank you. And yeah, so we've talked about a lot of these. Let's talk about some stereotypes. The stereotype that somehow bad things happen to people who make bad choices. Okay? So, I agree with that. I make a bad choice. There's going to be a consequence. But the way we say it is wrong. There's a consequence for making a bad decision. There's a consequence for making a foolish choice. That consequence is never, ever, ever rape. That consequence is never, ever, ever torture and violence. Ever, under any circumstances, for any reason. There are a lot of people that look at trafficking survivors and they think prostitutes. Well, most prostitutes don't really want to be there. You know what they want? They want to live. They want a chance to be able to get by, to take care of kids if they have them, to not be beat, to not be hurt, to not be afraid, to dream, because you can't live in that world and keep dreaming. Those who try to hold on to that dream don't live. So you let the dream go. They want to not get beat up. They want to not have quotas. They want to have a nice house. They want to have a car. They want to know that their kids can have better. Nobody picks, that's what I want to be. There's a defining moment in a child or a young adult's life that changes that life forever. Unless we step up to the gap and do something. And we can do it here when all that bad has happened. Or we can do it in the life of a child before that happens. But at some point in time, we're going to stand before God. He's going to say, where were you? You heard, you knew, you saw. They're hurting, they're bleeding, they're dying, they were in prison. Did you love them? Or did you turn around and say, they're a prostitute? But they made a mess of their life. Okay? So what? We still have a responsibility. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. This, in a nutshell, is what every survivor has experienced and what every one of us has an opportunity to grow from. This truth is, there is no too bad. There really isn't. There isn't a too broken. I don't believe that there's a too bad. I don't believe that there's a too broken. I don't believe that there's a too far gone. I do believe that too anything needs to be loved by people who understand what that too is and what that too does. In this case, people who understand trauma-informed, people who understand attachment issues, people who are willing to break through our trauma bonds, to break through the way our minds are literally changed by trauma. One instance, one rape changes a brain. Just one. Years ago, I was asked to figure out, like, well, how many times was it? I hate that question. But I did it. And then I said, well, how do I, like, those times when it was one time where there were 5 people there, how do I count that? So I kind of gave up, conservatively, at 22,000 times. from a baby to around 30 years old. I stopped counting at 22,000 times. Do I remember everyone? Praise God, no. Really, praise God, no. Do I have to remember everyone? No. But did everyone matter? Yeah, it did. Did everyone leave me more wounded? Yeah, it did. From the first to the last. They all matter. Me standing here today, I say I'm more whole than broken. I never say I'm healed. Nothing gonna happen until I get to heaven. I say I'm more whole than broken. This doesn't happen. There are very few survivors that can say I'm more whole than broken. Some of it's our choices, that's true. But you know, for the most part, it's really not. I can't tell you the number of survivors who are in horrific situations and call me and say, Hope, I need to get out. Hope, I can't hang on another day. And I have to honestly say, come on, we can get through this. We can get through one more day, because I know in my heart there's no place for me to get them to. No place. There aren't enough people that I can pick up the phone and call to in the country and say, hey, I've got this person who's ready to get out. Or I've got this person who's been out for a long time that's really ready to do the work. And here in Tennessee, we've got something so special. I got to spend last night on the ranch. Kind of think I got a sneak preview. It's a really special place. I woke up this morning and I looked out the window of one of the survivor houses. It's a beautiful, peaceful place. And I think about tomorrow walking on the trails you were talking about. Looking at the pond. I've spent a lot of time sitting by ponds on benches. Sometimes yelling at God. Sometimes just crying because I didn't want anyone to be around me when that meltdown came. Sometimes asking hard questions like, God, I don't understand. You say you're bigger, but in my world they were bigger. Where were you? It's okay to ask those questions because He's big enough to answer when we listen. And so, if you would like this presentation, we did record it. I will post it. But I challenge you with this. I've known Joe for, I don't know, not quite a year. It's a special, special place. This is a special family. And they really do need a community to come around them and support them and love them and pray for them and bless their children, because they give up greatly, but they also gain so much more. Can you go to the next slide? I'm not sure which slide. Next. Yeah. There's a dangerous line between helping and hurting. I've seen so many organizations and so many people that say, I'm called to human trafficking. Okay, I believe you. Maybe you're called to pray. Being called to pray doesn't mean you're called to walk with me. It's a hard walk. Like, crazy worth it, but it's a hard walk. I know that. I can't tell you the number of people that I still love and respect that have stood by my side that don't stand by my side anymore because they and together we had to say, can't be here. It's just too hard. Maybe you're called to give. Maybe you're called to be one of the people who's able to donate a house or donate some of the resources that they need or do the second kitchen in the survivor house. I don't know. But I believe that everybody's here for a reason. Now, if you're a horse person, I'm told there's a few of them here. Some of the things that I've talked about, especially with God, might be hard for you to understand. So I'm going to leave you with this, and I'm going to end and challenge you. When you rescue a horse, does that horse get better just because you give it some food? Probably not. Does it get better just because you give it a dose of medicine? Or does it take a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of time? So if that's what we know for a horse, Why with a human? Next slide, please. Next one. Yeah. With a human being, with our humanity, with the strength of our will, the beauty of our creativity, the way we are made, why would we not think that it would take something just as special for a human being? I'm honored to stand up here tonight and share my story and share a little bit about human trafficking. And I hope that as you leave with a different picture, because we have a face. And I've seen extraordinary evil. I've lived through extraordinary evil. But you know what? That leaves me with the potential to live life with an extraordinary appreciation. And those people who get to walk beside me or get to sit here get to begin to feel a little bit of what that extraordinary appreciation can be and what a redeemed life can be. It's just not okay for anyone to ever have to be told, I'm sorry, you're probably literally safer on the street. Because I know and you know, you don't know what to do when you get off. And I know there's nowhere for me to send you that's going to help you tonight or tomorrow, because there just aren't enough places like Blazing Home that actually get that it's not just love. It takes being informed. It takes the clinical experience. It takes the willingness to go the distance, to say and be able to walk out and love you regardless, knowing that as a survivor, especially as we're starting, we are going to do some of the dumbest things. We are, because we don't know. What you call dumb, what you call hard, we call normal. We call the best that we have. And so I would encourage you to, one, become more informed about what they're doing. Pray for them. Get on their mailing list. Find out what they're doing. And then I would encourage you guys to look around the room. Did you hear what they said? June 1st. And there are people in this room that's your seed. That's your fruit. Whether you're helping with the horses, whether you donated the land, whether you give whatever you can, whether you volunteer tonight, whether you're here and you're just finding out what the reality of this is, those are beds that the next time a survivor says that fits their profile, I'm ready. There's one place that I can confidently call. I don't recommend most programs. I just don't, because programs don't heal. Love does. Time does. Not time doing nothing. Time in therapy. Time learning. Time growing. So look around and give yourselves a hand. Because on June 1st, you guys have done something pretty amazing.